Attack!
The sword came down, and Zara caught it with her bare hand. Not the blade, she was not reckless, only fast, faster than anyone in either kingdom had ever learned to account for. She caught the flat, redirected the force with a rotation of her wrist that her Korean father had taught her in a courtyard in Hanyang before everything broke, and used the momentum to spin the wielder, a palace guard twice her size, face first into the stone wall of the corridor. He dropped. She stepped over him without breaking stride. There were four more between her and the throne room door. She assessed them the way her mother had taught her to assess everything, not as obstacles, but as information. Their stances told her which ones had trained together. Their eyes told her which one was afraid. Their weapons told her the kingdom had been preparing for someone exactly like her, which meant someone had known she was coming, which meant the betrayal ran deeper than she had calculated. And she would have to be angry about that later, because right now she had four guards and a closing corridor and a message that had to reach her mother's hands before the sun set, or 2,000 soldiers would march at dawn on a city that did not yet know it was about to burn. She moved. It was not a graceful fight. She had never understood the stories that made battle elegant. It was fast and brutal and practical, the fighting of a woman trained in two completely different traditions who had spent 24 years learning how to make them speak to each other. The footwork was Korean. Her father's school, the discipline of the Joseon court, the philosophy that said the body was a precise instrument and precision was the highest form of power. The strikes were her mother's, Yoruba warrior tradition, older than any dynasty, the understanding that force did not come from muscle alone, but from the earth, from the breath, from the specific fury of a people who had defended their land for generations and had never once considered the alternative. She carried both in her body. She had spent her entire life being told this made her incomplete. She had spent the last 3 years discovering it made her something neither kingdom had a word for. The last guard went down. She stepped over him, wiped her hand on her training wrap, and pushed open the throne room door. Her mother was not on the throne. Her mother was standing at the window, which was more alarming than any ambush, because Queen Adunola of the Oyo Southern Territories did not stand at windows. She sat on thrones and made rooms come to her. The fact that she was looking out at something rather than commanding it meant the something was beyond commanding, and there were very few things in the known world that Adunola considered beyond commanding. Zara closed the door behind her. Mother, Adunola turned. She was a tall woman, darker than the mahogany of the throne room pillars, with the particular stillness of someone who had learned long ago that stillness in a ruler communicated more than any amount of movement. She looked at her daughter, the blood on her wrap, the calculation in her eyes, the way she stood with her weight slightly forward the way she had since she was 3 years old, always ready, always already leaving for the next thing, and said, "You came alone. I sent the message 3 days ago. Where is your general?" "General Taiwo is in the northern pass," Adunola said, "with half the standing army." "Why?" "Because the Kang forces crossed the northern border 6 days ago." Her mother's voice was controlled in the way of someone controlling something very large. "Your father's forces, Zara, his banner, his cavalry formation." She paused. "His order." Zara stood very still. She had known this was coming. She had known it the way you know a storm by the change in the air 3 days before the clouds arrive. Not the specific shape of it, but the absolute certainty of it, the barometric truth of it. She had been in Hanyang 2 weeks ago. She had stood in her father's war room and listened to the court advisors and heard the language shifting, the territories of the South, the resources, the strategic necessity. She had watched her father's face while they spoke and had seen the things she had been watching for and hoping not to see for 3 years. The moment his political self fully consumed whatever remained of the man who had loved an Oyo queen and carried their daughter on his shoulders through the palace gardens and told her she carried the blood of two of the greatest peoples the world had produced. That man was gone, or buried so deep under the weight of dynasty and survival and the council of men who had never loved anything that crossed a border that he could not be reached. She had ridden south the same night. How long before Taiwo returns from the north? Zara asked. 10 days at minimum. The Kang advance will reach the outer settlements in 4. I know. Then you cannot hold the north and the south simultaneously with the forces you have. Zara moved to the strategy table. The maps were already spread. Her mother had been here before she arrived, had been here calculating alone, which was a thing Adunola never did alone. You need to collapse the northern defense, concentrate here and here, she pointed, and use the river as your western boundary. It narrows the front. It compensates for numbers. And the settlements we abandon in the north? Evacuate them. 3 days. It's possible. Zara, her mother's voice was not loud. It never needed to be. Look at me. She looked. You just rode from Hanyang, Adunola said, from your father's court. You arrived with intelligence about the Kang advance that my own scouts have not yet confirmed. You walked through 4 of my guards. A pause. Which side of this war are you on? The question sat in the throne room like a third person. Zara had known it was coming. She had been preparing her answer since she rode south through the night, rehearsing the clean and certain version of it, the version that closed the question and left no room for doubt. She had a loyalty. She had made her choice. She knew what she was. But she was standing in front of her mother in the throne room where she had played as a child on the days the queen let her be a child rather than a symbol. And the clean answer kept turning into something more complicated. I am on the side of the people who will die if no one thinks clearly in the next 4 days, she said. That's the only side I'm capable of being on right now. Adunola looked at her for a long moment. That is not an answer. I know, Zara said. It's the truth. They're not always the same thing. Her mother was quiet. Then she turned back to the window and said something Zara had never heard her say in 24 years. I am afraid, she said. Not of losing the war. I have lost battles before. I am afraid. Her voice changed slightly, just at the edge, just enough, of what it means that the man who taught you to fight is now marching on the land that made you. Zara felt something in her chest crack slightly along a line that had been stressed for a very long time. Mama, she said. She had not called her that since she was small. Adunola did not turn. Go, she said. Do what you do. Think what no one else is thinking. I will hold the throne room. A pause. Come back to me. She rode north before dawn. The Kang advance camp was 3 days from the outer settlements, and she reached its eastern perimeter in 2 weeks, riding hard with the specific recklessness of someone who was also beneath the recklessness, calculating exactly how much risk the mission required and not 1 unit more. She had grown up in both courts. She knew both armies. She knew their signals and their weaknesses and the names of their generals, and the particular pride of each that could be used against them if you understood pride as a military variable, which her mother had taught her it always was. She also knew that her father's second general, Commander Park Seo-jun, was a man of 60 who had served the Kang dynasty for 40 years, and who had once, when Zara was 11, and suffering the particular loneliness of a child who fit nowhere completely, sat with her in the palace library for an entire afternoon and read her the histories of warrior women from across every culture he knew about. He had done this without being asked, without ceremony, simply because he had seen her alone and understood what she needed. She had never forgotten it. She had suspected he knew she hadn't. She sent a request for meeting through the channel only he would recognize. He came alone to the tree line at dawn, which told her he still trusted her, which told her he had not yet been fully absorbed by whatever logic was driving this advance. He was older than she remembered. 3 years older, which should not have been visible but was, the age sitting in his face with the specific weight of a man who had spent those 3 years doing things he hadn't wanted to do. Zaraya, he said. He had always used the Korean diminutive with her. She had always let him because it felt like something genuine rather than something political. Sojun Jungun, she said. General Sojun. They regarded each other in the gray dawn light. Behind him the camp moved. Fires, horses, the organized sounds of a military force preparing its day. Behind her, the grasslands stretched south toward her mother's kingdom, already warm with the early sun, already smelling of the earth and the long grass, and the particular morning of this land that she had loved her whole life with the uncomplicated love of the body before the complicated love of the political self. "You should not be here," he said. "If the wrong person sees you, then we should talk quickly." She looked at him directly. "Why is this army here, Seojin? Give me the real reason, not the court reason." He was quiet. "The court reason," she continued, "is resources and territorial security and the southern trade routes. I sat in that war room 2 weeks ago and heard every version of the court reason. I'm asking why this army is actually here, because you have served 40 years and you know the difference between a war that needs to be fought and a war that needs to appear to be necessary." Seojin looked at the ground briefly and then back at her. "Your father is under pressure. I don't think you fully understand," he said. "The Northern Lords have been circling for 2 years. His legitimacy is being questioned. A successful Southern campaign demonstrates strength," she said flatly. "He is spending the lives of 2,000 soldiers and potentially destroying a peace that has held for 20 years to demonstrate strength to the Northern Lords. Politics is Don't tell me politics is complicated," she said, and her voice came out with more heat than she intended, the heat of someone who had been told this her entire life as a reason to accept things that should not be accepted. "I am the daughter of a Korean king and a Yoruba queen. I have lived inside the complication of politics since I took my first breath. Do not explain it to me as though I am external to it." Sojin looked at her, and she saw in his face the same thing she had seen in his face when she was 11 and alone in the library: recognition, not just of her, but of what she represented. The thing neither kingdom had been able to fully accommodate, the answer to a question neither had been willing to ask. "What do you want, Zara?" he asked, quietly, without the general's formality. "I want you to delay the advance by 5 days," she said. "That's all. 5 days. Tell my father the terrain assessment requires additional time. Tell him anything that requires 5 days. And in 5 days? In 5 days I will be in Hanyang," she said, "in front of my father, and I will say what I should have said 2 weeks ago instead of riding away in the night like someone who has already given up." Seojin looked at her for a long time. The camp moved behind him. The grassland breathed behind her. The dawn held them both in its gray and neutral light, impartial as all dawns are, indifferent to the allegiances of the people it illuminated. "And if he doesn't listen?" Sojin asked. "Then at least it was said," she told him. "At least it was said by someone who had the right to say it." She rode north again. She had not been inside the Hanyang Palace in 2 weeks, but it received her the way places receive people who belong to them. The guards at the outer gate knew her face. The servants in the corridor moved aside. The architecture itself was familiar in the specific way of a body that had been small in these spaces once and had grown up inside them. She was her father's daughter here. Half of her was entirely at home here. She felt it in her posture, the slight shift that happened in her body when she moved through Korean spaces, the particular alignment of self and environment that happened automatically and involuntarily and that she had never been able to fully suppress, even when she had reason to want to. Her father was in the inner courtyard, alone, which was unusual, which she took as either good or very bad. King Kang Junho was 53, lean and deliberate, with the face of a man who had made hard decisions for so long that the hardness had settled permanently into his features. He had been a different person once. She remembered the person he had been. She had grown up with both versions, the public one and the private one, and she understood at what point in her adolescence the private version had stopped appearing and only the public one remained. He looked up when she entered. Something moved in his face. Not surprise, she had stopped surprising him years ago. Something more complicated. Something that might have been relief and might have been grief and was probably both. "You came back," he said. "I always come back," she said. "That's the problem neither side has ever fully understood. I always come back to both." He was quiet. She stood in the courtyard of her father's palace with the stone and the careful gardens and the structured beauty of a dynasty that had built itself over centuries to look exactly like power, and she said what she had not said 2 weeks ago. Call back the army, she said. Zara, call it back. Father, look at me. She waited until he did, until his eyes met hers with the full contact she was requiring. I am standing in front of you, your daughter, made of you and of her, made of this courtyard and of the red earth of the south and of every night you spent teaching me that power was not the same as greatness. She paused. I am the proof that the two kingdoms can make something neither could make alone. I am standing here, and you are preparing to destroy the place that made half of me to prove something to men who will never be satisfied regardless of what you prove. The courtyard was very still. The palace moved quietly around its edges, distant voices, wind in the structured trees, but at the center, where a king and his daughter stood facing each other across 24 years of love and complication, there was only the held breath of a moment that both of them understood could not be taken back once it resolves. The Northern Lords, he started, are not worth her life, Zara said, are not worth the lives of the people in the outer settlements who will burn, are not worth whatever I will become if I am forced to choose between the two halves of my own blood on an actual battlefield. Her voice fractured on the last part. She let it. Is that what you want? Is that the war story you want to be remembered for? That you sent your army south and your daughter had to decide which parent to betray? Kang Juno looked at his daughter for a long time. He looked at her the way a person looks at something they made and lost sight of and have suddenly found again. The shock of the original thing, the quality you had forgotten was there, the irreducible fact of it standing in front of you, demanding to be reckoned with. Your mother, he said. His voice was different, lower. The voice of the private man, the one she had thought was gone. Is she? She is afraid, Zara said. She told me. She never tells anyone. She told me because she is my mother and she needed me to know. She paused. She is afraid of what it means that the man she loved is marching on the land she built. And I think, her voice was very careful now, very quiet, I think you should know that. I think you should know that she is afraid, because I think you are the only person in the world whose knowing it would matter. The courtyard held them. The palace held them. The dynasty and the kingdom and the 40 years of carefully constructed distance and the 2,000 soldiers 3 days from the southern border held them. Kang Junho closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were the eyes of the private man. Old and tired, and still, underneath everything, the man who had loved a queen across every impossible distance that had ever existed between their worlds. Send a rider to Sojin, he said. Tell him to hold position. Zara let out the breath she had been holding since she rode north. This is not finished, her father said. The Northern Lords will not. I know, she said. I'll handle the Northern Lords. He looked at her. How? She picked up her sword from where she had set it at the courtyard entrance. Out of respect, she had entered her father's space without a drawn weapon since she was 16. She checked the balance of it in her hand. The blade her mother's blacksmith had made. The technique her father's master had taught. The body that belonged to both and to neither and to something that was entirely its own. The same way I handle everything, she said, by being the thing no one has a strategy for. Both worlds had claimed her. Neither world had deserved her, but she was not theirs to deserve. She was her own. She had always been her own. And standing in her father's courtyard with her mother's earth still on her boots and the balance of two kingdoms and everyone she loved held carefully in her two steady hands, Zara finally understood that being claimed by two worlds was not a wound. It was a weapon, and she was only just beginning to learn how to use it.